This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Kuf Tes, and we're holding on the Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Ches Amid Beis. The Mishnah is on the first wide line. Continues the Mishnah with the Chiyuvim of Ishomer in different situations in which they swear they make a shvuah, sheker. Says the Mishnah, Heichan Pikdaini. Someone comes over to a shomer, and usually the klal is whenever it's a unspecified, it's a shomer chinam. Someone comes over to the shomer chinam asking, where is my pikadain? Amar lo, he responds, Avad, I lost it. Mashviachani, he asks him to swear, V'amar amein, and he makes the shvuah. And this Mishnah is really a almost continuation of the Mishnah on Kof Vav. Is the reason why it sounds extremely familiar. Va'idim idim Isai shachlu, and the idim testify that indeed he had the item, but he consumed it on his own. And again, he swore that he did not. What's the halacha? Mishalim Karen, he has to pay the Karen. If he admits on his own, then we have the regular rule of any time we have Aidas Baldin. What's the rule? That rule is Mishalim, Karen, Chaimish, V'ashan. You have to pay a Karen, the principal, Chaimish, an extra fifth, V'ashan, bring Karmanaisha. Case number one. Case number two, Echad Pikdaini. If we ask the Shemer Chinam, where's my Pikadain? Amar Loini responds, Nignav, it was stolen. Mashbiachani, please swear to that. Amar Amein, and he does. Vayedamid, and I say Sheganvu that he indeed stole it. Mishal Tashlume, Kefel. This case, we have the classical case of Kefel. Kefel being the payment when we have a Shvuas Sheker for Geneva. If he admits on his own, then Mishalim, Karen, Chaimesh, Vashan. And again, the classical din of Aidas Baldin, that you pay Karen, Chaimesh, Vashan. Hagoizel es aviv. That's the end of case number two. Again, the only difference between case number one and case number two is case number one was dealing with the taina of Avad and a Shua Sheker on Avad, you pay the Karen. Case number two is the taina of Nignav and a Shua Sheker on the Geneva, on the stealing, and the payment of Kefel. Case number three, Hagoizel es aviv, if someone steals from his father, V'nishbalai, and he swears that he didn't steal it. Umeis, and the father dies, and after the father's death, Umeis, the son admits that he indeed was the one that stole the item. Harezim Mishalim, he has to pay Karen Chaimesh ve'asham. Libanov Ailachav, he has to pay Karen Chaimesh ve'asham to the sons, meaning the other sons. Ailachav means the father's brothers. Ve'em einai roitzeh, and if he does not want, meaning he doesn't want to have to pay, or he does not have that which to pay, then he can borrow from someone else and then return the item. And the Balei Chayim will come and collect from the Yerusha. So a way to circumvent the payments is that he borrows from someone else. He borrows, we'll call it from Shimon. And now when Shimon comes to get his money, he says, I don't have it, but I have a portion in the estate, and then he'll be able to go and take that portion from the estate. Case number four, and of course the Gemara will elaborate on all these cases. Someone says to his child, I make an Isser Hana Yatanena Mishali, if you get benefit from that which is mine. If the father dies, the son is allowed to inherit him, and it's not considered that getting benefit from the father's properties. However, if the father said, not only can you get benefit from me, but he said explicitly, you cannot get benefit from me both in my life and in my death. then imazed, and the halacha is, if the father dies, lo yirush, and the son doesn't inherit him. V'yachzer lebanav, it goes to the other sons, or the father's brothers. V'mein loi, then leiva u'balichayiv bayin v'nifrayim, then he borrows other balichayiv come and collect from the estate. Says the Gemara, dealing with what we'll call case 3, which was what? Which was the case of the son stealing from the father. And we said the son has to pay back. Who does he pay back to after the father dies? He pays to the other Yarshim. He pays to the other brothers. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Afilu li'arniki shel tzedakah. Let's say there's no Yarshim. He's the only one. So who does he pay back? He has to give it to the arniki, literally the wallet, the coffer of tzedakah, and let it be distributed to other people because he has his chiyuv shava. He has to return to his father. His father's not around. He's the only one that's a Irish. So he has to give it to tzedakah. Amar Rapapa, says Rapapa, V'tzarich sheyoymar zeh gazal avi. And he has to say, this is a stolen property of my father. Asks the Gemara, what is the reason for this thing? Why, if the father dies and he has to return that which he stole from his father, he goes as far as requiring him to pay it back, like we just said, to tzedakah? Amai, nimchalel nafshei. Let him be moichalet to himself, meaning let him collect. He's the Irish. So yeah, he has to pay back the father, but then he gets it right back. So why is he not allowed to just give it to himself? Milay Tanan, 6 lines down, Kuftasam and Aleph, do we now learn in the Mishnah? Let's say the person once steals from, says, I forgive you for paying back the Karen and not the Chaimesh. What do we see? Then he doesn't have to pay that back. So we see that it could be forgiven. And once it is forgiven, then the Gazlan, the robber, is absolved from paying back. So why do we say the same thing over here? He has to pay back to whom? Himself, and everything's good and dandy. Rav Yechanan, says Rav Yechanan, like Kasha. Ha Rav Yosef Aglili. The Mishnah says that there's Mechilas Rav Yosef Aglili. Ha Rabbi Akiva. Teitani, we learned in a brayso, main lish gayel lehashiv hasham. If there's no relative to return the item, the guilt payment, chish adam Yisrael, shein lo gayelim, does it exist? Is there such a thing that there's no relatives? Everything has some relatives. Ella, what must the case in the Torah be referencing? Begezel agera kasam mitaber. Someone steals from a ger and he actually has no relatives. Hooray! Shegazel ager v'nishvaloi. Someone steals from a ger and he swears falsely to him. Mishama Hashem is ger and hears that the ger dies. Vayamalek asvoi. Vashamoi Yerushalayim. While he was bringing up the carbon asham, upaga baisager, and he met that ger, and he realizes that he's alive. So what does he do? The ger is allowed to say that no, the money is considered a milva to you, umeis, and then the ger dies. Then he is that which he has in his hands. So Rav Yosef Aglili clearly holds that yes, when you owe money to another entity, it could be an effect. There could be a mechila, and through the mechila, you would be able to take back the money to yourself. That's Rav Yosef Aglili. Rabbi Akiva Omer comes like Rabbi Akiva and he says, says Rabbi Akiva, nothing doing. The only way to give it back is you got to rid yourself of the gezela, meaning you got to give it to someone. So says the Gemara, this is the same machlekes by us. Ask the Gemara, Rav Yosef Aglili, loishna l'nafshei, loishna l'acheirim. Doesn't make a difference. Matzi machal. Rav Akiva, loishna l'acheirim, loishna l'nafshei, loy matzi machal. Rav Yosef, according to Rav Yosef, hu adin. Dafilu lo zak from the milva. Vaydik dan is of a milva. Ladia koichai de Rabbi Akiva. Dafilu zak from the love milva. In the tekana chitz exila mitachas yadai. So says the Gemara, the machlekes over here is basically in Rabbi Akiva whether there could be a mechila, and that will be the same thing in our case, whether he could be meichlin and thereby keep the item to him for himself. Maskif la Rav Sheshes. Again, this is Rav Yochanan. This is how Rav Yochanan is explaining that the Mishnah that says that the Gazlan could be forgiven is Rav Yosef Glili, whereas our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. Maskiv la Rav Sheshes on this pshat, ihachi, if it's true what you're saying that you're able to quote unquote forgive the debt to yourself, meaning there's no one else to give it to, so you keep it for yourself. Ihachi, if that's true, the Rav Yosi Aglili l'shaminan l'nafshei. If that's true, then according to Rav Yosi Aglili, why doesn't the Mishnah say that he could do the same thing? He could be meichle to himself, the kol shekain la'acherim, and certainly he could do the same thing for others. The Rav Akiva, the shamin la'acherim, that he cannot be meichle for someone else, the kol shekain l'nafshei. So the Gemara is wondering, asks Rav Sheshes, how are you telling me that the difference in our Mishnah, the previous Mishnah, the Mishnah, whether you could be Meichel or not, is Rav Yisrael and Rav Akiva, and would it make sense that they argue in such scenarios? Because Rav Yisrael Glili should argue with regard to be Meichel to himself, which is our Mishnah, and then we would know the Mishnah elsewhere, and Rav Akiva the opposite, or Rav Akiva should only say his din elsewhere, and we'll know the din by us. Why is that not how they speak out their machlekes? So Ella Amar Rav Sheshes, so rather Rav Sheshes says the following. Everything is Rav Yosef Glili. Ki Ka'amar Rav Yosef Glili, when does Rav Yosef Glili say his din? To Matzi Machal is Lachirim. Aval Nafshei Loi Matzi Machal. When does Rav Yosef Glili say his din? Rav Yosef Glili says his din that it can be Machal is only Lachirim. Not like we thought. But then the question is, in our case, the case is that they properly made it into a milveh. If it's properly made into a milveh, then that's the only way that it will work. Says the Gemara, so that's really teretz number one. Teretz number two, Rav Yechon, Rav Yossi, Rav Sheshes, whether it's machlekes within Rav Yossi Glili or to all can be touched up as Rav Yossi Glili. Rav Amar says, Rav, 3 lines from the bottom, Ha v'ha Rav Akiva. Everything really is Rav Akiva, says Rava. So how do we explain the two Mishnayos? Ki Amar Rav Akiva, to lo matzi machal l'nafshei. When does Rabbi Akiva say that you cannot be Meichel? That's when it's l'nafshei. That's when it's for yourself. Avalachirim matzi machal. But for someone else, you could yes. Mechlal. What does this imply in the territory of Rava as we turn over to Kovtesim base? Rabbi Yosef Lili Savar. I feel enough. Sheinami matzi machal. He holds you caught, but then the question is, what's the case of Gazal Ger? My Rava says Rava, Achabamayaskin, Kishay Gazal es Ager, Vinishmalo, you may say Ger, Vahoidala Cherim. And you the Haidah was someone else. So therefore, Misa to be Ina the Aidi Kanai Hashem and Asnai Likayanim. So that's the reason why this case is different. Case is that after stealing from the Ger, he swore falsely. But then the Ger was nifter. And the Haidah only came afterwards. So in such a scenario, because at the time of the Haidah, there was no one to be kind of the item because the ger is no longer. So therefore, in that scenario particularly, says Rav Yossi Aglili, there will be a kinyan by a Kadosh Baruch Hu and then give it to all the other kohanim. Bai Ravina. Continues the Gemara, Kaftasim Beis, 10 lines down. First word line is Ravina. Asks Ravina, Gozal Hagioires Mahu. Is there any difference, asks Ravina, if someone steals from a Gioires? Do we say the same thing? That the payments to the ger, instead of to the ger like we just saw, is going to go to the kohen after the ger dies, so too over here by a Gioires? Or do we say, no? Answers the Gemara, Ish Amar Achmana, Velo Isha. Do we say that it's unique halacha? Paying to the Kehanim is only by an Ish, not by an Isha. It's just a normal way of writing the pasuk, but Avada, there's no difference, man or woman. Amar le Rav Aaron le Ravina. So Rav Aaron says to Ravina, I'll answer your Shaila Ta Shema. Titania Ishen Lialish Isha Minayin Shoimer. Ha-Moishav, when the Torah says that he returned, Harikan Shnayim Imki Matam Leimerish. Why the must say Ish? Ish Atasar Lachsar Acharav Im Yesh Loi Goyalim. You know what the fundamental difference between man and a woman is that when the ger is a man, you have to go look into the fact to make sure there's no other relatives. Imlav. Why we do a she'in like goyalim, and that's going to be the scenario that will give it to the Kohanim straight without even looking into it. And Tana Rabbanan says the Gemara on that fact, on this note of the Kohanim receiving payments on behalf of the ger. La Hashem, says the pasuk, La Kohen, it's returned to Hashem for the Kohen. Kanui Hashem, which means Hashem acquires it. V'nasla lekaynim shabayisa mishmar. Atam lekaynim shabayisa mishmar. Reinu Allah. V'chol kayin sheyer. Take it to any kayin shuaymer. Milvad ayala kipurim asher yechaper boy. Alav harei lekayin shabayisa mishmar akasov midaper. Continues the Gemara, similar in the vein of the ger. Tana Rabbanan. Tana Rabban Arisha Yakalizel Kayin Minayin Shloyomer Hoyel Viatlikanim Arehu Tachas Yadai Yeshali. Ask the Gemara 1 second. If someone steals from a ger again, and again, this case is that it flips, excuse me. The Gazlan was a Kayin. The Gazlan came to Bezdin, and the Gazlan admits that he stole from a ger. So what has to happen, as we just saw, he pays to the Kayanim. Now the Gazlan himself was a Kayin. Says the Gemara, Minayin, how do we know? We don't say that because he goes to the Kayanim, this guy can say, so now it's mine. Vidinu, and in Judaism it makes sense that he could be able to say it's his. If a kohen is zeicha from other people, of course he should be able to be zeicha for himself. But Rav Nosson Aimer b'lashon acher. Something you don't have a portion in, you don't have a bailus in until it comes to your rishus. And then, once you get it, you can't let it leave your hands. Whereas, davar, which that's going to be the regular case where the kohen receives from someone else. But in our case, davar sheyesh lo chelek ba, you have a chelek, it's your item. Even before it comes to your possession. Now, certainly no one can take away from you, and certainly you should be able to just keep the money for yourself because you're a kohen. Says the Gemara, you can't bring your proof. Why? No one has a chelik in such an item until it's given to a kohen. There's no comparison because once you have your portion, others having it as well. You have to take the gzela out, give it to the communal fund, and then all the Kohanim will take from there. Says Merawait, Voksev, but the Bosling says, Vishash Kedoishav, Logi Yech be for you. Says Marach Maiskina Bekayin Tame. Even Kayin Tame Devishal Chelik Ba Miaslay, does he even have a Chelik? Lasya Lekayin, Lekayin Misteh Achuza. We learn out from Steh Achuza. Tanya, Achuzal Slaymatam Aloy, Marminayin Lesada Hayoid say Lekoyahanim be Yoivel. But Kayalay Echam and Akayanim be Nayin Sheloy, we don't say Hayoid be Yoivel Arehu Tachas Yadi. Potentially, we don't allow him to keep the item for himself. V'dinu b'shalachirim ani zaycha b'shalatzmi like kolshkin the same kavachaymer. Where do we know? Not Tamalaymer kisada acherim lakayin tiyach uzasam achuza shaloi ve'einazu shaloi haketzad yotzim b'tachas yadim mischalekes cholecha v'kahanim, proving the fact that we just said that in a scenario where there's no one else to do, we divide it amongst all the kohanim.